Chapter 1. The Gift That Changed Everything. I should have known something was wrong when my parents surprised me with a graduation trip to Rio de Janeiro. We'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week, and Mom had been clipping coupons like her life depended on it. Dad worked double shifts at the factory, coming home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. The idea of them scraping together money for an international trip seemed impossible. "We've been saving for years," Mom said, her voice trembling as she handed me the plane ticket. "You deserve this, honey. You worked so hard in college." I stared at the first-class ticket. First class, and felt my stomach drop. Something cold and unfamiliar twisted in my chest. "Mom, this must have cost thousands. We can't afford—" "Don't worry about the money," Dad interrupted, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Just have the time of your life, okay?" The morning I left for Rio, I caught Mom crying in the kitchen. When I asked her what was wrong, she pulled me into the tightest hug of my life and whispered, "Promise me you'll be careful, Alice. Promise me you'll come home safe." I laughed it off then. I thought she was just being an overprotective mother, sending her daughter off to a foreign country alone. But as my plane descended toward Rio's shimmering coastline, with Christ the Redeemer spreading his arms wide over the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents were hiding something massive from me. The first 2 days in Rio were magical. I stayed at a luxury hotel in Copacabana, another expense that should have raised red flags, and spent my time walking the famous beaches, taking photos at every tourist spot, and trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, my parents had finally caught a break. Maybe Dad had gotten that promotion he'd been hoping for. Maybe the penny pinching had finally paid off. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew that first-class tickets and 5-star hotels don't come from factory wages and coupon clipping. Something was very, very wrong, and I was about to find out exactly what my parents had been hiding from me my entire life. Chapter 2. Paradise Lost. On my 3rd morning in Rio, I decided to explore beyond the tourist areas. The concierge had warned me against it, but I'd always been drawn to authentic experiences over sanitized vacation packages. I wanted to see the real Rio, not just the postcard version. I took a bus toward the Santa Teresa neighborhood, clutching my camera and trying to blend in with the locals. The cobblestone streets were lined with colorful colonial houses and street art that told stories of struggle and hope. For the first time since arriving, I felt like I was seeing something real, something that connected me to the beating heart of this incredible city. That's when I noticed the motorcycle following me. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Rio had a reputation for crime, and maybe I was just being overly cautious. But when I turned down a quiet street lined with art galleries, the motorcycle turned too. When I ducked into a small cafe for a coffee, I saw the writer park across the street and pretend to check his phone. My hands started shaking as I ordered my café con leche. The barista, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, noticed my distress. "Você está bem?" she asked. "Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her about the motorcycle, about the growing dread in my chest, but my Portuguese was limited. Instead, I just nodded and tried to smile, hoping I was imagining things. When I left the cafe, the motorcycle was gone. Relief flooded through me, and I laughed at myself for being so paranoid. This was Rio, not some crime thriller. I was just a college graduate on vacation, not some target for what? I didn't even know what I was afraid of. I spent the next hour exploring the neighborhood, taking photos of the stunning views over the city below. The Christ the Redeemer statue seemed to watch over everything, a constant reminder that I was far from home, far from the safety of my parents' modest house with its secondhand furniture and carefully budgeted meals. That's when they grabbed me. It happened so fast. One moment I was admiring a mural, the next moment strong hands seized my arms.
A cloth covered my mouth and nose, and the world went fuzzy around the edges. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the motorcycle, parked in an alley I hadn't noticed.
Chapter 3. The Voice I Didn't Recognize. I woke up in darkness, my head pounding and my mouth tasting like chemicals. The air was thick and humid, filled with unfamiliar sounds, distant traffic, voices speaking rapid Portuguese, the rhythmic sound of samba music from somewhere far away. I was still in Rio, but this wasn't the Rio from the tourist brochures. My hands were zip-tied behind my back, and I was sitting on what felt like concrete floor. Panic crashed over me in waves as I tried to piece together what had happened. The motorcycle, the hands grabbing me, the cloth over my face. I'd been kidnapped. "She's awake," a voice said in accented English. A door opened and harsh light flooded the room. I squinted, trying to see my captors, but all I could make out were silhouettes. 2 men, maybe 3. "Your parents didn't tell you, did they?" one of them said, and there was something almost sympathetic in his voice. "They didn't tell you who you really are." "I don't know what you're talking about," I managed to say, my voice hoarse and terrified. "My parents don't have any money. They can't pay whatever ransom you want." The men laughed, and the sound sent chills down my spine. "No money?" the first man said. "Your father is Thomas Mackenzie, yes? The Thomas Mackenzie who's been hiding millions in offshore accounts for the past 20 years? The words hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Mackenzie was my father's name, but the rest of it made no sense. Millions? Offshore accounts? My dad worked at a factory. He came home exhausted every night, his hands stained with grease and his back aching from manual labor. "You're wrong," I said, but even as I spoke, doubt crept into my voice. "My dad works at Peterson Manufacturing. He's not rich. We're not rich." "Peterson Manufacturing," one of the men repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You mean the company your father owns?" The room spun around me. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be. My entire life we'd struggled with money. I'd worked part-time jobs through college to help pay for expenses. Mom had mended our clothes instead of buying new ones. We'd driven the same beat-up Honda for 15 years. But then I remembered the first-class ticket, the luxury hotel, Mom's tears in the kitchen, Dad's refusal to meet my eyes. "We're going to call your father now," the man said, holding up a phone. "And you're going to find out exactly kind of man raised you."
Chapter 4. The Call That Shattered Everything. The phone rang 3 times before Dad answered. His voice, so familiar and comforting, came through the speaker with perfect clarity. "Hello?" "Mr. Mackenzie," the kidnapper said, his English careful and precise. "We have your daughter." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. When Dad spoke again, his voice was completely different. Gone was the tired factory worker I'd known my entire life. In his place was someone cold, calculated, and utterly in control. "How much do you want?" Those 5 words destroyed everything I thought I knew about my father. There was no panic in his voice, no desperate pleading for my safety. Just a businessman negotiating a transaction. $10 million, the kidnapper said. "That's reasonable." Dad replied without hesitation. "Wire transfer or cash?" I felt like I was drowning. This couldn't be my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and worked himself to exhaustion to provide for our family. This stranger on the phone spoke about $10 million like it was pocket change. "Cash," the kidnapper said. "Small bills. You have 48 hours. I'll need 72 hours to liquidate that much without raising flags, but I can have it ready." "Alice," I called out, my voice breaking. "Dad, what's happening? Who are you?" There was another long pause. When he spoke again, I heard something that might have been pain in his voice,
but it was buried under layers of something else. Guilt, maybe? Or resignation. I'm sorry, Alice. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Find out what? I screamed, but the line had gone dead. The kidnapper looked at me with something that might have been pity. Your father has been laundering money through his factory job for 2 decades. Peterson Manufacturing is a front. He's been working for some very dangerous people, and now they want their money back. That's impossible, I whispered. But even as I said it, pieces were falling into place. The way Dad always paid for everything in cash. The way he'd disappear for hours at a time claiming he was working overtime. The way Mom would get nervous whenever anyone asked too many questions about his job. Your graduation trip wasn't a gift. It was bait. They wanted to get you somewhere far from home, somewhere your father couldn't protect you, and he let them.
The words hit me like physical blows. He let them? The trip was his idea. He suggested Rio specifically. He knew what would happen when you got here, and he sent you anyway. The man's voice was almost gentle now. I'm sorry, girl, but your father chose to save himself instead of protecting you. Chapter 5. The Weight of Truth. They left me alone after that, and I spent the next several hours in a state of shock that felt like drowning in slow motion. Every memory of my childhood was recontextualizing itself, revealing hidden meanings I'd never seen before. The time Dad came home with a black eye and claimed he'd been in an accident at work, the hushed phone conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room, the way Mom would get nervous around police officers, even during routine traffic stops. The fact that we'd moved 3 times before I turned 10, always suddenly, always to a new state. I thought about the shabby clothes and the ramen dinners, and I realized they'd been a performance, a carefully constructed facade to hide the truth from me, and maybe from themselves. But it couldn't have been completely fake, could it? Mom's tears when she couldn't afford to buy me the shoes I wanted for homecoming. Dad's exhaustion when he came home late. The way they'd celebrated when I got my college scholarship, not because they couldn't afford tuition, but because it meant I was succeeding despite the lies they'd built our life on. Or maybe that was fake too. Maybe everything was fake. The room I was being held in was small and windowless, somewhere in what I guessed was a favela based on the sounds filtering through the walls. Children playing, music drifting from nearby apartments, the distant sound of Ria's traffic. Life was going on all around me while my world fell apart. I tried to focus on the sounds of the city, tried to ground myself in the reality of where I was. Rio de Janeiro, the city of Christ the Redeemer and Carnival and breathtaking beaches. I dreamed of visiting here since I was a little girl, fascinated by the photos in National Geographic. Now I was here, and all I could think about was how everything I'd believed about my life was a lie. The door opened, and one of my captors entered with a bottle of water and a plate of rice and beans. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his 20s, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in this situation. He untied my hands long enough for me to eat, and I was grateful for the small mercy. Your father, he said as I drank the water. He's not a bad man, not really. But he made bad choices a long time ago, and now those choices are catching up with him. How do you know? Because, he said quietly, my family was destroyed by the same people your father works for. The difference is, my father didn't have $10 million to bargain with.
Chapter 6. The Other Side of the Story. The young man's name was Carlos, and he stayed with me while the others went to handle the ransom logistics. He didn't talk much at first, just sat in the corner watching me with those sad, intelligent eyes. But as the hours passed and the reality of my situation settled in, I found myself desperate for human connection, even with my captor. You said your family was destroyed, I said eventually. What happened? Carlos was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My father worked for a man named Alejandro Vega, same man your father works for. My father was a chemist. He helped process the money, clean it, make it look legitimate." He paused, staring at his hands. "One day, my father tried to get out. He wanted to take my mother and my little sister and disappear, start over somewhere safe. But you don't just walk away from men like Vega." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened?" "They killed him," Carlos said simply. "Made it look like a robbery. Then they killed my mother to send a message. My sister..." His voice broke. "My sister was only 8 years old." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of Rio continuing its daily rhythm outside. I wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but what could I possibly say to someone who'd lost everything? "Your father is smart," Carlos said. "He never tried to run. He played their game, built his cover, kept his head down. And it worked. For 20 years, it worked. You got to grow up safe, thinking you were just a normal girl with normal parents. But I wasn't safe. I'm here. You're here because Vega is dying. Cancer. He wants to settle all his accounts before he goes. And your father owes him more than money. He owes him loyalty. Absolute loyalty. This," he gestured around the room, "this is a test." "A test of what?" "To see if your father will sacrifice everything to keep working for Vega. If he pays the ransom, if he does what they ask, you go home and nothing changes. But if he refuses, well, then you become a message just like my family was." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "He's going to pay," I said quickly. "He already agreed to pay." "Yes," Carlos said, but there was something in his voice that made my stomach drop. "But paying the ransom is only the first part of the test."
Chapter 7. The Real Price. I didn't have to wait long to find out what Carlos meant. The next morning, the leader of the kidnappers, a man they called Miguel, returned with news that made my blood run cold. "Your father has the money," he announced. $10 million, just like we asked. But Senor Vega has added another condition. I felt Carlos tense beside me, and I knew whatever was coming would be worse than anything I'd imagined. "Your father must deliver the money personally," Miguel continued, "here, to Rio. And when he arrives, he must choose." "Choose what?" I whispered. "He can save you," Miguel said, "or he can save himself. But not both." The room tilted around me. "What does that mean?" "It means your father has been marked for death for months," Miguel explained. "Vega knows he's been skimming money, planning his own escape. The old man decided to let him live just long enough to see what he'd choose when forced to decide between his life and yours." Carlos was staring at Miguel with an expression I couldn't read. "That wasn't the plan," he said quietly. "Plans change," Miguel snapped. "Vega wants to know if Thomas Mackenzie is capable of love, or if 20 years of criminal life has made him as cold as the rest of us." I felt like I was falling through empty space. My father was coming to Rio. He was walking into what he knew was a trap, carrying $10 million, all to save a daughter who'd just discovered her entire life was built on lies. "He won't come alone," Carlos said. "He's not stupid." "Of course he won't," Miguel agreed. "But it doesn't matter. Vega has people everywhere in this city. The moment your father's plane lands, we'll know. The moment he tries to make contact with authorities, we'll know. And if he tries to run, if he tries to take the money and disappear, well, he knows what will happen to his daughter." I thought about Dad's voice on that phone call, so calm and controlled when he heard the ransom demand. Had he known, even then, what the real price would be? Had he already accepted that saving me meant sacrificing himself? "When?" I asked. "His plane lands tomorrow night.
Vega wants to meet him at the Christ the Redeemer statue at midnight. Poetic, don't you think? A man choosing between salvation and damnation, with Jesus watching over the whole thing. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. In less than 24 hours, my father would climb up to that iconic statue overlooking the city, and one of us would die.
Chapter 8. A Father's Love. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad, somewhere high above the Atlantic Ocean, flying toward what he knew was his death. I tried to imagine what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Was he scared? Angry? Resigned? Carlos sat with me through the night, and I found myself talking to him about my father. Not the criminal mastermind I'd discovered, but the man who'd raised me. The man who'd taught me to throw a curveball in the backyard. Who'd stayed up all night helping me build a volcano for my science fair project. Who'd cried during my high school graduation speech about overcoming adversity. He loves you, Carlos said simply. Whatever else he is, whatever else he's done, he loves you. How can you be sure? Because he's coming, Carlos said. He could disappear tomorrow, take the 10 million and vanish, change his name, get a new face, start over somewhere Vega could never find him. But he's not doing that. He's flying into a trap because you're worth more to him than his life. I wanted to believe it, but doubt gnawed at me. What if this is just another lie? What if he's planning to somehow save us both and I'm just a pawn in some bigger game? Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you know why I'm really here? Why I'm part of this?" I nodded. Because Vega promised me that if I help him test your father, if I help him prove that even Thomas Mackenzie can be broken, then he'll tell me where my sister is. My heart stopped. Your sister? But you said... I said they killed my parents. I never said they killed her. She's been missing for 8 years. I've been searching for her ever since. And 3 months ago, Vega's people approached me with an offer. Help them with this job, and they'd give me information about where she is. The room fell silent. I stared at Carlos, seeing him clearly for the first time. He wasn't just a kidnapper or a criminal. He was a brother, desperate and broken, willing to do anything to find his lost sister. "So we're both pawns," I said finally. "Yes," he agreed. "But that doesn't mean we have to stay that way." Chapter 9. The Plan. Carlos's plan was insane, dangerous, and probably doomed to fail, but it was the only chance we had. "Miguel and the others will take you to the Christ statue tomorrow night," he explained. "They'll use you as leverage to force your father to make his choice. But there's something they don't know." He pulled out a small device I didn't recognize. "GPS tracker," he said. "I've been placing them on all of Vega's vehicles for months. If my sister is still alive, if she's still in Rio, then she's being held in one of his properties. You're going to abandon the job to look for her?" "I'm going to use the chaos at the statue as cover," Carlos said. "While everyone's focused on your father, I'll slip away and check the locations I've marked. It's my only chance." "And what about me?" Carlos looked me in the eyes. "I'm going to cut your restraints before we leave for the statue. When the moment comes, when everyone's distracted, you run. You run as fast as you can down the mountain and you find the police. They'll kill my father." "They're going to kill your father anyway," Carlos said gently. "This isn't really about money or loyalty or any of that. Vega is dying, and he wants to go out knowing he still has power over life and death. Your father is already dead. The question is whether you are too." I knew he was right, but the thought of running while Dad faced death alone made me sick. There has to be another way. "There is, but you're not going to like it." He pulled out a cell phone, not the one Miguel had used to call my father, but a different one, older and more battered. "This has been modified," he explained. "It can send messages that look like they're coming from anyone. If I send a message to your father from Miguel's phone, telling him to meet at a different location, at a different time, he'll know it's a trap.
Yes, but he'll come anyway. And if we're lucky, the confusion will give us all a chance to survive. I stared at the phone, understanding what Carlos was really offering. A chance to save my father's life, but only if I was willing to trust a man who'd kidnapped me, a man whose own desperation might make him unreliable. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you helping me?" Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because 8 years ago, no one helped my family. And because maybe, if I can save someone else's father, it'll make up for not being able to save my own."
Chapter 10. Christ the Redeemer. The next evening, as the sun set over Rio's magnificent skyline, Miguel and his men prepared to take me to what we all knew would be the final act of this nightmare. Carlos had been careful to hide his plan, acting like the loyal kidnapper they expected him to be. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to his phone. At 10 p.m., Carlos sent the message. It was simple. Change of plans. Meet at Sugarloaf Mountain instead. 11:30 p.m. Come alone or she dies. We waited to see if Dad would respond. He did, with a single word. Understood. "It's done," Carlos whispered to me as Miguel loaded us into the van. "Your father will go to Sugarloaf. When he realizes you're not there, he'll try to call. That's when Miguel will discover the deception. And then we run." The ride to Christ the Redeemer took us through Rio's winding mountain roads, past the favelas, and up toward the iconic statue that had watched over the city since 1931. I dreamed of seeing it up close since I was a child, but not like this. Not as a prisoner being taken to watch my father die. The statue was even more impressive in person than I had imagined. Standing 98 feet tall, with arms stretched to 92 feet wide, it dominated the peak of Corvado Mountain like a benevolent giant. At night, illuminated against the dark sky, it looked both magnificent and haunting. Miguel checked his watch. 11:45, he said. "Your father should be here any minute." That's when his phone rang. I watched Miguel's face change as he listened to whoever was on the other end. He glanced at Carlos, then at me, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Your father isn't coming," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He's at Sugarloaf Mountain, wondering where you are." Carlos tensed beside me, his hand moving slowly towards something in his jacket. The other men were starting to realize something was wrong. "Someone sent him a fake message," he continued. "Someone who wanted to disrupt our plans." His eyes fixed on Carlos. Someone who thought they could outsmart Alejandro Vega. The silence stretched out like a held breath. Rio sprawled below us, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness, the ocean beyond black as velvet. From up here, the city looked peaceful, beautiful, like a place where terrible things couldn't happen. But terrible things were about to happen.
Chapter 11. The Confrontation. "Run!" Carlos shouted, pulling a gun from his jacket and firing a warning shot into the air. I didn't hesitate. I bolted toward the pathway leading down the mountain, my hands finally free from the restraints Carlos had cut hours earlier. Behind me, I heard shouting, more gunshots, the sound of men scrambling in the darkness. The pathway down Corcovado Mountain was steep and treacherous at night, meant for tourists walking leisurely during the day, not for desperate escapes in the dark. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees on the rough stone, but I kept running. The lights of Rio grew larger as I descended, and I could hear the sounds of the city getting closer. Traffic, music, life. Behind me, the gunshots had stopped, but I could hear footsteps pounding down the path. Someone was following me, and I didn't dare look back to see who. That's when I heard the sound that changed everything. A helicopter. It came from the direction of Sugarloaf Mountain, its searchlight sweeping across the mountainside. As it got closer, I could see it wasn't a police helicopter. It was black, unmarked, the kind used by people who didn't want to be identified.
The helicopter circled the Christ statue, its spotlight illuminating the figure still moving around the base. From my position halfway down the mountain, I could see Carlos pressed against the statue itself, using it for cover, while Miguel and his men had taken positions behind the tourist facilities. But the helicopter wasn't there for them. It was there for the man climbing out of it. Even from a distance, even in the darkness, I recognized my father. He hadn't gone to Sugarloaf Mountain after all. Somehow he had figured out the deception, and now he was here, arriving in dramatic fashion with what I assumed were Vega's other men. The $10 million was probably in that helicopter, and Dad was about to walk into the same trap Carlos and I had tried to help him avoid. I had to go back. Every instinct told me to keep running, to get to safety and call for help, but I couldn't abandon my father, not when he'd risked everything to save me. Not when I finally understood that whatever lies he'd told, whatever crimes he'd committed, his love for me was real. I turned around and started climbing back up the mountain.
The scene at the statue was surreal when I reached it. Dad stood in the center of the tourist area, a metal briefcase at his feet, while Miguel and his men formed a semicircle around him. Carlos was nowhere to be seen, but I could smell gunpowder in the air. "Where is she?" Dad was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Safe," Miguel replied. "For now." Chapter 12. The Truth About Love. I stepped out of the shadows, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "I'm here, Dad." The look on his face when he saw me was everything I needed to know about who he really was. It wasn't the cold businessman from the phone call or the mysterious criminal from the stories. It was my father, the man who'd raised me, terrified and relieved and filled with a love so fierce it took my breath away. "Alice," he said, and his voice broke on the word. Miguel smiled, but it was a cold, cruel expression. "Touching. Now, Mr. Mackenzie, let's discuss the terms of your daughter's release." "The terms are simple," Dad said, never taking his eyes off me. "You let her go, and you take the money." "Oh, but there's more to it than that," Miguel said. "You see, Señor Vega has one final test for you." That's when Carlos appeared, stepping out from behind the statue with his hands raised. There was blood on his shirt, but he was alive. "The test is complete," he said quietly, "and your father passed." Miguel spun around, confusion and anger warring on his face. "What are you talking about?" "Vega is dead. Has been for 3 days. I've been working with the federal police for months, trying to bring down his organization. This whole thing, the kidnapping, the ransom, the test, it was designed to get evidence of his network." The world tilted around me. "You're a police officer?" "Federal agent," Carlos corrected. "Deep undercover for 2 years. My sister—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "My sister died 8 years ago, just like I told you. But I've been working to make sure no other families go through what mine did." Miguel was backing away, reaching for his gun, but other men were emerging from the darkness, real police officers, surrounding the area. "Your father has been helping us for months. The moment he realized Vega was targeting you, he contacted the authorities. This whole trip, the kidnapping, the ransom, the test, it was designed to get evidence of his network." I stared at Dad, seeing him clearly for the first time in days. "The phone call, when you sounded so cold, I had to make them believe I was still working for Vega. I had to protect you while giving the authorities time to position themselves. But the money—" "Fake," Dad said with a small smile. $10 million in counterfeit bills. The FBI's been very creative." As the police led Miguel and his men away, I finally understood the truth about my father. Yes, he'd made terrible choices 20 years ago. Yes, he'd gotten involved with dangerous people. But when it mattered most, when his family was threatened, he'd found the courage to do the right thing. "I'm sorry," he said as he pulled me into his arms. "I'm sorry for all the lies, for all the danger I put you in. I've been trying to find a way out for years, and when they threatened you, it's okay.
I whispered against his chest. "It's over now." As we stood there at the base of Christ the Redeemer, with Rio's lights twinkling below us and the weight of 20 years of secrets finally lifted, I realized that sometimes the most important truths aren't about the past. They're about what someone is willing to sacrifice for love. If you've ever had to question everything you thought you knew about the people you love, or if you've experienced the power of second chances, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this emotional journey through the streets of Rio, please like this video and subscribe for more travel stories that will take you to beautiful places and unexpected truths. Sometimes the most incredible destinations are the ones that change us forever.